the visual effects stuff I'm doing now is like 90% being an animator because the actual editing I'm doing is so basic. In terms of that, it's masking. Nearly 100% of the editing I do is just masks, frame by frame, masking out things.
Welcome to this week's Animator's Journey podcast episode. I'm with Kevin Perry, who is a viral sensation when it comes to animation and has a professional background, including working on stop motion animated films like Kubo and the Two Strings, Missing Link, and the Box Trolls while he was at Leica. And we have him here today to learn from his journey and hopefully gain some insight into his mastery of animation. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. It's a great intro.
If you're interested in starting your own animator's journey, check out animatorsjourney.com, where I've created a focused and simplified accelerated approach to becoming a 3D animator. I want to start, I'm curious how you began. I remember actually seeing your, I think it was a student short film back in the day. It's almost, I guess, 13 years now ago when that came out. I was just starting to learn animation at the time and it kind of blew me away. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started and what your education background is?
Yeah, that film, The Arctic Circle, which, it's 13 years ago. That's crazy. That was the senior project for me studying animation in college. So I was in a 4-year degree program, and the 4th year was just make a film as your kind of calling card to get into the industry. So yeah, that was my grad project.
The quality of that short was noticeable. I mean, was it pretty easygoing once you got that out there? Were you quickly hired, or how did that go to your first job?
I was hired immediately, not in stop motion. My first job was in CG on a kid's show. Yeah, and they completely hired me based just on my animation skills. They could kind of see through the technique of it and had trusted me that I could animate. But yeah, I was hired pretty much right out of the gate.
So you mean to say like you didn't have CG experience, but they didn't care and they hired you anyway?
Exactly.
I
had one walk cycle maybe that I had done in Maya. But yeah, basically they hired me and I showed up, and it was kind of the first week or two they were like, I just Google around and learn Maya a bit. That's awesome. That's how it started.
That was just in time, it looks like.
It is. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I mean, it doesn't, if you can animate, you can animate.
I think, a lot of people, I teach online as well, and a lot of people get caught up with learning software. And I feel like what I love about stop motion so much is it's so agnostic. Like it really doesn't matter. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I know you've taught a stop motion course online as well. Do you kind of have that similar attitude towards teaching?
Yeah, stop motion, it's pretty unique in the world of animation in that it's very, that you can't really hide with stop motion. There's no passes, there's no, setting keyframes, there's no polishing. If you can animate stop motion, I think you prove you have a pretty good understanding of frame by frame.
Yeah, I think it's, as a 3D animator, I feel like an imposter in talking to you, because to your point, like we get to scrub a timeline, we can go back and forth, we can go to other versions that we had, we can update the rig, there's all these different things that we can do that is just unavailable because of how analog stop motion is. I have so many questions around this. I don't even know where to start. Like, can you explain a little bit how you begin maybe a bit more complicated shot in stop motion world? I'm assuming there's a lot of planning involved.
Yeah. And it is overwhelming to think about kind of from scratch. Like if you're thinking, how do people animate shots with 6 characters acting and interacting with each other? And it's overwhelming when you get into it as well. And it is very much a kind of step by step. You start from scratch. If you're hired by a studio, you start animating tiny elements like a newspaper trickling in the wind in a shot, or just little things. And then every shot you do, you kind of just like push yourself a little bit further, and then you get a shot of a hand grabbing something. And then, a few months later, you get a shot where there's a face in it and just looks over at something. And then you'll do a shot where a character says a word, and then it's so gradual by the time you get to those really advanced shots. You have quite a bit of confidence going into it. But on the technical side of it, it's basically you want to go into the final shot with zero questions. That's kind of the mentality you have. So whatever it takes to plan that out. So you'll do, you'll start with a pop through where you're just figuring out where the puppets are.
A
And
pop through is like what 3D animators would call like a blocking pass or layout pass, maybe, or
exactly, yeah.
yeah.
And if it's a static camera, you might just do a couple of poses. Or if there's a camera move involved, you might just leave the puppets where they are, just to prove the move and where the puppets are going to be. Kind of like a physical blocking phase, and then you'll go into a rehearsal where you're animating it at maybe 12 frames per second or even less, just to figure things out. And then you'll kind of do passes until you can go into that final shot saying like, I have zero questions. I can pull this off frame by frame.
I mean, even just hearing that, it's even more of a performance, I feel like, than really what we do, because we get to edit so much. And it sounds like with the process you're describing, it's like game day, like the Super Bowl comes around and you've been practicing and you better perform on that day.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
Yeah, it is very much like that. And I would often, on features, on the days when I'm going to launch a big shot, there's kind of ritual before it where I would sweep my set clean, get my tools prepared, and like set out nicely. It was like just getting everything ready so you can just zen and have everything accessed and do what you need to do.
When you're working through it on that, the big day, like how are you accessing all the planning that you've done up to that point? Is it in notes form, or you have stuff in the computer? How are there overlays in Dragon Frame that you use? How does that work?
Yeah, it's really switched over to mostly software overlays, and a lot of people still use kind of like X sheets on the side of the software, but it used to be, people would completely rely on X sheets because they didn't have the software to see the stop motion. So I've seen a lot of the X sheets from, like the 90s through the early 2000s with some of the like key animators at that time. And their X sheets were like, they'd have a column for the hips and be like, okay, my hips are going to sway this. And they'd like draw little arrows and almost like squiggly lines, like timing charts of like the way things are going to move left, right, forward, back, up, down for all of the body parts. So they're like graph editing on paper with X sheets just to like keep track of what they want to do. But I think it's transitioned more to overlays, and filming reference is a big part of it. So a lot of the acting we would do, and I kind of reference it in past tense. I'm not doing features right now.
Sure.
A lot of people film themselves and retime things, mash clips together, and then they'll overlay that. Maybe not overlay as an onion skin, but just like to the side so they can reference the timing of it. Overlays are a bad idea because you'll end up killing your animation if you stick to it. But yeah, it's good to have a few layers of just like pop-up windows beside your live feed, and you'll often you'll reference that kind of stuff.
That's cool. And like I grew up, I mean, I'm assuming we're maybe around the same age. Like we grew up with watching stuff on 12s, and that transition to 24 happened, I feel like, during your career, maybe. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, or like how you approach things differently? Because to me, I mean, doing stuff on 12s, and for people who aren't familiar, that's basically, a drawing or a pose every 2 frames if you're watching something at 24 frames a second. Whereas now the high-end feature stuff is done every single frame, depending on the production. Maybe there's still some circumstances where that's not true, but I remember just seeing that for the first time. And some people, I think, even confusing Missing Link as a CG film. I remember reading some headlines or something, Can you talk a little bit about the challenges related to that? And does that change your approach at all?
Yeah, and there's a lot of budget and which studio is doing the animation at play there. Typically, you would need the budget to do all the animation on ones just because of how time consuming it is. And a studio like Leica, their mandate is kind of to push realism as far as possible with the animation versus, a studio like Aardman is going to go something a bit more broad. And for ones versus twos, I do it here with my own animation, and on twos you're approaching it more kind of poppy, and there's a bit more snap to it. It's a completely different approach. And then on ones, you're doing a bit more flowy and organic. And you can't really do the same performance for ones and twos. I find if I try to go flowy and soft on twos, then it just loses its edge and kind of gets a bit muddy. So there's completely different approaches for each. You have to really change your mindset based on what frame rate you're doing.
That's awesome. To kind of take a step back into your journey overall. So you started on the TV show. Were you still animating in stop motion in your spare time because you wanted to get into feature? How did you get your foot into feature going from that TV show?
I was toying a bit with stuff at home, but it was still my film. I think every job I've got has been with that film that I made.
Right.
And I was, it's kind of a funny story. I got into features. I was animating on that TV show, and a feature popped up in San Francisco being directed by Henry Selick, who did Nightmare.
This is the Shadow. I had a
Shadow
friend
King.
who started on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And they posted an ad online for a storyboard position for the Shadow King. And I saw it and I was like, well, it'd be great to animate on that. I should just use the contact in this storyboard email. So I just grabbed that email from the storyboard position and just cold called them and sent them my film and said, hey, if you need an assistant animator. And they responded within a few days. And I think within like a week or two, I was in the process of getting the visa going to get over to San Francisco. So I kind of just kicked my foot into the door.
I think that's a great example because I mean, like, you know, even back then, like you had like such incredible talent, but you know, that's not enough. You kind of have to still be proactive and find how you can get your foot in the door and create the opportunities for yourself. I think that's such a great example of, you know, you can't just like rest on your laurels and like make something cool and hopefully everything comes to you.
Yeah, you really do have to, you know, kind of promote yourself and, you know, like show your your talents and abilities to where you want to be.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately that movie didn't get made, but what happened from there for you? I guess that still gave you some experience. I guess, were you guys doing tests or things or?
Yeah, I had a really unique experience on that movie where I was an assistant. The animators were producing footage. So there were a few scenes that were full scenes that were shot. And Henry Selick wanted to previs the movie in stop motion to basically like figure out the movie first in cardboard and like basic puppets. So I was given that job where they would build me basically like an entire scene set in cardboard, stand-in puppets, and like a kit of lenses. And I would just kind of fact find. I'd be like, okay, there's, you know, first shot, let's frame it up. What lens kind of gets the feel of it? And then I would just like pop through these lighting stand-in puppets, and I'd block out entire scenes in cardboard.
That's wild. And how much involvement? I mean, were you taking storyboards and doing that?
Yeah, it was basically like replicate the storyboards and write down every shot. Like, what lens did you use? You know, kind of draw an overhead map of where everything's placed. And then I would take all that and take it into Premiere and cut scenes as given by the boards, and then send them off to Henry, and he would kind of approve things from there. So I was like it was like mini directing school for the year I was out there. So I don't think anyone has ever had that experience ever except me.
Yeah, it sounds super unique. And I was going to ask, were you alone in doing that? Were there other people doing that same stage of production?
Yeah, I think that there was one other assistant helping out with that process.
That's amazing to have that. That's crazy to have that kind of access. I'm sure to have Henry's notes come back and that kind of stuff. I'm sure that was incredibly educational too.
It was, yeah. From
there, how did your career kind of move forward after that? Was that a difficult time when everything kind of got shut down, or?
Yeah, everything got shut down. It was just one day. We were called into the lunchroom, and a rep from Disney Pixar came in and said, you know, we're shutting this movie down. That's it. It happens. A good lesson to learn. It's unfortunate. And yeah, because I'm Canadian, my wife and I were out there in San Francisco. We had moved out to the West Coast. And they basically kind of gave us a grace period of 2 months to get out of the country based on the visa, you know, requirements. So yeah, we just hung out in San Francisco for a little bit and then moved back here to Toronto. And that's when Leica was gearing up the production of Box Trolls. So all of a sudden, these, a film's worth of pro animators were let go. So Leica kind of pounced on that and started contacting people. So they had an opening for a assistant position. So the supervisor at Leica emailed me and kind of offered me a job to come out there. And back we moved to the West Coast of the U.S.
I know. That's like the story. If I've moved around so much, and I'm sure it's the same for you. It sounds like you kind of have to have some flexibility. I guess the pandemic's changed that a little bit to a degree, but especially for stop motion, I assume, for feature, it's not like you can do that very remotely.
No.
You have to be on site.
They did a bit of that, I think, for Wendell and Wild, where they set people up in their garages and bedrooms at home with sets, and they'd send out like a lighting person to get things set up. And yes, awesome. It's not impossible, and it's pretty rare.
Yeah. So you were there for a few years. What was that experience like working at Leica, and were there any kind of eureka moments you learned through that?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying with starting from very basic shots. So just doing insert shots of, a prop might move, and then progressing to more and more difficult shots. And a lot of the time as an assistant is spent doing testing. So, an animator might have a shot coming up where a character has to like burst through curtains. And for the entirety of production, those curtains have just been glued down as a background, set. But this shot comes up where those curtains have to like burst open and swing and all this physics stuff. So as an assistant, you'll be given the job to test that and to proof of concept it. So you'll work with the rigging department to say, okay, these curtains, I got to put rigs down the front seams. Let's put magnets in the pipe folds at the bottom and metal in the floor, and we can get all the physics working. And then you kind of it's an opportunity to prove yourself. So you'll animate a test to prove that works, and you'll try to go above and beyond to give me a puppet. Let me walk them through the curtain. And you'll prove that you can do something to get an opportunity on actual shots. So there's a lot of that kind of testing and proving yourself, and then slowly building up to doing character shots. So it's quite a curve to get into the more difficult stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, in CG, I think it's fairly standard for people to be doing personal shots at home. With stop motion, you kind of have to have, I guess, the support or at least the knowledge to make your own rigs and do that kind of a thing. Where once you're in Leica, were you just kind of in that kind of flow of progression through that evolution of getting more and more shots, or were you kind of doing stuff on the side at all, or is that not? I wasn't
doing any stop motion on the side during that. But yeah, you're doing so much of it during the day that it's pretty hard to get home and want to do more of it. And I think the benefit of stop motion is that there is kind of that trial by fire element to learning it and to proving yourself in a studio, where when you are given the opportunity to do a slightly more difficult shot and you're thrown into it on production, if you don't deliver, you've basically wasted the production's time. And there's someone can't go in and polish that shot for you. So you have
that's
to.
That's a great point.
You have to do it. You can't. You can fail,
really
but you
stressful.
have to. It is, yeah. And I think there are assistants who haven't been able to handle that stress, and they find out that this isn't what I want to do. It's pretty mentally taxing, yeah. Especially on a Friday evening when you've left off on a frame that's you just know in your gut isn't good, and you have to stew with that until Monday morning. And then all weekend you're like, I can push through it. No, I can't. And then you get back Monday morning and you're like, cut back 2 seconds. I need to do that part over.
How would you go about that? I mean, are you just kind of onion skinning that to perfection if you have to kind of go back a little bit?
Yeah, it's for cutting back in stop motion. It's based on what's happening and how difficult it is, but it's not too bad to move the puppet back. If it is impossible, you'll cut back enough to a bigger action that you can hide it.
Something faster. So it's,
you'll find a good spot to seam it. And then it's even cutting back is is a thing in itself, in that you have to tell production, I'm cutting back. And then they kind of announce it to the entire production. Okay, we have to cut back Kevin this many frames, calling all crew to his stage to like, camera has to make sure everything's smooth. Like, so you're kind of announcing your your failure.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, if I want to open up an old version of some scene in Maya, no one can ever needs to know. You know, that's wild. Yeah, how public, and it makes sense because it's so collaborative with all the other departments. Yeah, you can't really sneak that, I guess.
And if there's a camera move, the camera's on like a 1-ton crane, and it's being operated by very specific software. So there is a crew that has to come in and cut that back to make sure the camera moves back into the right position. Because if you try to sneak it yourself, you could spin that rig through the set.
Oh my God. Yeah, I'm getting anxiety just hearing this.
I'm probably making it sound more dramatic than it is.
No, I mean,
there's an emotional element to that.
100%. I mean, because we're talking about it in the terms of, 5 or 10 minutes here in this conversation, but we're describing something that takes, I'm sure, weeks. You've invested your time and many other people's time. I'm sure that weight is very heavy to carry on a production like that. That's intense.
And then there's also on longer shots, there's director check-ins. So every couple of days, the director would do rounds on set to check out shots in progress. So the director would come through and see your shot halfway done, and they either immediately go like, yeah, okay, it's good, keep going. Or they're like, where did you go with this shot? You took it in a weird direction. Let's cut it back or start it over.
Yeah. And I guess would they be involved in the approval process early on at each one of those kind of stages of what you call the pop out and kind of maybe animating on 12s? They're seeing everything before you're moving forward.
Yeah, stage. You would, after every kind of iteration of the shot, you would get called to the edit room, to the edit suite with the director, and then watch it in the cut. And that's their opportunity to give notes.
Mm-hmm. How locked are the cuts on productions like that? Because if you're trying to match action or something between cuts, is it you're pretty confident of what's the frame that you're having to match to? Or?
Yeah, you're matching frame cuts for the edit. That's pretty much locked in storyboards, and then you'll do maybe a 9 or 10 frame handle on either end. So you'll kind of animate, 10 frames before your shot starts and 10 frames after. So the editor can kind of fine tune it afterward.
Speaking of all the kind of how much weight it is working in features, did that play kind of the segue into the next stage of your career of kind of, I don't know if you're going to return back to that, in the future, but there was you left that arena to do your own thing. Did that, the anxiety and I mean, for me, what I would call anxiety, I don't know if you had it, but just listening, I get it. Did that play into your decision? What was part of the decision to kind of pursue your own stuff?
Is pretty organic. I think it had a lot to do with just the speed or the lack of speed of producing stop motion. You're weeks on a few seconds. And as social media started getting into video and seeing a lot of people making fun, creative stuff online, I just kind of felt compelled to make stuff in my, evenings and weekends that would take a day to make and then post it online. So it was a pretty big contrast to the slowness of feature production.
So it just was born out of like a creative outlet and I guess, ownership and control over the fact that you can do something in a day. You don't have to wait a month to show anyone something.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. And it seems like, did yours start? I mean, the way that I look at your work that you post now, it's as much stop motion as it is kind of visual effects to a degree, but you can see your animation background at play because the visual effects shots are so like seamless. Like, I feel like only an animator could pull that off because your attention to detail over those frame cuts or like, listening to how I broke myself in half, you alluded to like these things you're doing have been around for forever, but you're executing them at such a high level that I think comes from your animator background, it feels like something totally new. Do
Yeah, I
you
think
think that played a part? Yeah.
that's exactly it. I think the visual effects stuff I'm doing now is like 90% being an animator, because the actual editing I'm doing is so basic. In terms of that, it's masking. Like nearly 100% of the editing I do is just masks, frame by frame, masking out things. But it's that understanding of movement and staging and anticipation into a trick, that I think is the key to it. So understanding how to set that all up is so much more important than the actual editing of it.
Yeah, there was a great quote from, I think, like the 70s or 80s or something, of Steven Spielberg. He was in an interview at AFI, and he said he thought all directors should be animators first, because they have to know exactly what they want on every frame
Yeah.
before they start going. And that's what animators' jobs are. So is that, you are a director now of your own stuff. And is that, played a part in pursuing like your own freelance work, or do you have ambitions for, pursuing bigger projects?
In terms of the path of my career, it's kind of like a day by day right now.
Fair enough.
uh,
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying the commercial work I'm doing. I've had an opportunity to do a couple more, like directing actual commercials, like television commercial, that kind of stuff. I don't have a plan to do feature animation at the moment. I don't think I'd leave Toronto just because I have a family now here. I can't see leaving for months or a few months at a time. Yeah, it's really just going with the flow, and I have no idea where it's going because social media changes every day. Platforms are falling apart and popping up. Really just going with it, going with the flow right now. All I know is that I really enjoy being in the ad space, and I don't see video ads fading away anytime soon. Companies always need to advertise. Video is where it's at on social media for companies to advertise. So I think that'll last at least a career's worth for me. We'll see.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your commercial work came kind of born out of the work you were doing on social media. I see that you're doing them simultaneously. You kind of have a foot in both. Is there one that you prefer over the other, or you kind of enjoy juggling both for right now?
Oh, you mean ads versus personal work?
Yeah. Like, being a full-time YouTuber, for example, or doing something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, I think 95% of my time is making ads now.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty much my entire schedule now is booked up with making ads. So last year I had the time to do maybe 2 personal videos, which
Wow.
The story of that is, most people are, creators or personalities online, and they kind of supplement it with product placement once in a while. But my story is a bit different in that it's less about me and more of my production studio and what I'm making. Yeah, everything I posted last year was pretty much an ad, and that's just
I don't even realize it because I just see it as awesome work, and it's kind of subconscious. And as an animator, I guess you have to animate something. So if it's it just works so well, I guess, with
that. That's the goal, is to just to make ads at least that are enjoyable and people want to watch more than once. But I think that's kind of the story of my path on social media, is that it was all personal work, and then it slowly got more professional. In that now I'm allowed to make ads. Like that's been the goal the whole time. I've succeeded at it. So people kind of cheer that on versus hating me for doing product placement and stuff.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess being a creator, would there be some nervousness, I guess, because you had already built a huge following to then start to do that work. And and you're saying you didn't feel any friction there when you started to do that?
Yeah, I've been pretty careful in what I've chosen to advertise and companies I've worked for. Yeah, never quite do anything that feels out of place. If it feels wrong, I pretty much won't do it.
So
yeah,
you said no to some projects before then, not based on that kind of idea?
Yeah, some things just don't work well.
Yeah. And do you have, I don't know how much you care to share, but do you have, like, how did that process work? Did you get an agent, or people contacting you directly? Like because I know I mean, there's a ton of animators or just creators in general who are like, I mean, that's like their dream situation is they just get contacted by brands to create cool stuff. Like how does that work, or how did that work for you?
Yeah, I was pretty lucky in that I got set up with an agency pretty early on, maybe 2016 or so, when I was kind of just getting started, and had a few videos that did really well. And I've been with that agency ever since. And my current agent I've had for 4 or 5 years now, since I stopped working in features. And that's a huge part of the success is having someone represent me. And the typical way it works is that a company will reach out to me, I'll respond and tag my agent in, and then he's responsible for like digging out the details of all the terms and negotiating and all that stuff. And then I kind of just step back until the creative part needs to be dealt with.
Cool. And how does project management go? Do you kind of have a team around you now to hire riggers or lighters, or how much are you involved in that? And how do you manage that? Is that someone else, or is that on your shoulders?
I have zero team. So all the production is just me in this basement.
Wow, that's crazy. How do you do it? I don't have a better question. That's crazy.
It's kind of just, I just picked up a lot through my experiences. So yeah, working on Shadow King and features, putting cameras into place and being considered where lights are and staging, and just picking up a lot of like lighting tips from just being on sets. And I wouldn't say, like lighting and production, I'm kind of, I know enough basically. Yeah. My lighting is pretty natural. I don't go too crazy with stuff. And then my wife is in video production as well. So she learned actual, took film in school. So she's taught me a lot. All my cameras I've stolen from her. So
and we chatted a little bit before we started. And so you mentioned you're using like a Sony camera, like that you've had for a while.
Yeah. So using old as in, 5 or 6 years old, but that's a few generations of cameras back. But in stop motion, you're capturing stills. So those files are like 6 or 8K. So you don't really need the latest and greatest camera as long as you're getting good image quality. That's
this is kind of a broader question that made me think of this when we're talking about shooting stills. How and when are you ever considering motion blur or, stretch, like exaggerating things, smear frames or whatnot? Is that, I mean, I know back in the day when like, Star Wars, were filming model sets, they would basically do like a compositing effect and kind of take two pictures to kind of blur between. Is like, do you ever get that nitty gritty in that kind of a thing? Or I guess it depends on the project.
I don't think I've added motion blur in a while.
Yeah.
Maybe once in a while, but typically not. Maybe on big actions that need it. Once in a while, I'll do multiples of toys just to, create that illusion of speed. I do incorporate quite a bit of squash and stretch in the Lego bricks that I animate, just in, in the way they move and bounce, and you can kind of have a lot of fun with that. Products, I typically try not to squat, just to respect the shape of the product.
Right. Yeah. I don't know how to, sorry. I have like so many questions. I'm just like so eager to like figure this out. So, because what made me think of this is, as you mentioning the Lego stuff that you've done, those are done on ones, right? Or the ones I think we're done on ones. Like I've done some on ones.
I think most of them have been done on either 12 frames per second or 15.
Oh, 15.
I don't think I've ever done 24 frames.
Okay, they just feel so smooth. Everything feels so smooth. Like, how are you, when you're doing smaller motions, how are you physically manipulating things to get that fine detail? I guess things are on rigs, so it has some friction to hold smaller movements. Are you physically touching things, or do you have a tool that you're using to push things around? How does that work?
Yeah, so typically the toys or the Lego bricks will be on a rig. So,
Mm.
and a rig would be, attached to the end of a few ball joints and barbells. So, kind of zigzagging, and those are pretty controllable. So, micro movements you can bend those, and then that'll typically go to a winder, which is a really precise. You have a dial that you turn, and it travels up or down on a single axis. And
How do
that's
you
pretty much.
choose? How do you choose between one or the other when like the rig itself could move up and down, but also the winder? Do you know? Okay, for this action, I'm using the winder only. The, how
Yeah.
do
A
you?
winder would do a vertical or horizontal travel versus
Mhm.
bending one of the ball joints would have more of an arc to it because it's
Mm.
along a pivot. Um, yeah,
So you're
and
using them
often,
in conjunction, I guess. Yeah. God,
yeah, it's
it
kind of
just
just whatever gets the job done. And then oftentimes you'll get lost in that and you can't
tell.
undo it.
That's wild. Are there any kind of horror stories of you like having to just be like scrap this, or you bump the table, or is that fairly common, or you've minimized those these days?
I've minimized quite a bit of that in my studio. I've had shots like that on features where puppets have just snapped in half mid
Yeah.
shot, like just a spine is just broken completely. Um, and those
Do
ones
you
you have to.
know going? Do you know going into a shot like this puppet's been used like on the last four shots, so it's on its last leg, or do you know the history of the puppet you're using?
Yeah, the puppet will go to the puppet department before every shot and get
Hmm.
mechanically tuned up, and then its costume set back to how it should be, and paint uh, adjusted. So every puppet is pretty much reset per shot, but sometimes the wear and tear or the violence of the shot or something will wear it down in the middle of a performance, and it falls apart.
I think maybe it was Wendell or the new Henry Selick movie where I'm like, how are they animating these guys and the clothes aren't moving? Like they're not fluttering.
Yeah,
How would you technically go about doing something like that to where
I don't know too much of the science behind it,
yeah.
but oftentimes they'll just treat the clothing that the puppets are wearing. So they'll treat them with some kind of, I don't know, like setting liquid, or I don't know.
Yeah, some
There's
solvent.
they've done something that, or you work in where you're allowed to touch.
Mm.
So if a puppet has a chest block inside, they'll expand it to reach the surface in the middle of the chest or by the shoulders. And that's kind of where to grab the puppet all the time. You're not just like randomly grabbing the torso.
Mm-hmm. Another random stop motion question. When you're the tie downs on the floor, I guess you're only using those if you don't have a rig, like a winder rig that you're using. You're just drilling holes every time that you need a foot.
Yeah.
And then what happens to those holes? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you're just kind of just slowly destroying your set, or
yeah, by the end of production, a set just has like hundreds of holes all over it. But yeah, so you're trying to minimize the amount of rigging as much as you can. So if a character's just standing there acting, you tie down the feet, and that's drilling 2 holes per foot, and then putting these bolts through the bottom up into the foot, and that just helps solidifying them, and it gives their feet a good sense of weight because their rubber shoes or silicone shoes won't they'll really be holding onto the floor.
mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the process of rehearsing a shot, is figuring out where those holes need to be drilled, because you'll just use them again for the hero shot, or at least you plan to. Oftentimes you'll go off course and have to drill beside. You'll oftentimes just get clay or plasticine, and as you walk along the set, you'll fill those in and smooth them over to match the color and the material that they've walked over. And I've done shots in Kubo when he's running around at the battle at the end. We'll oftentimes get black marker, the black UV marker, and write instructions on the set and where feet need to go and arrows and stuff. And then it's only revealed with a black light flashlight.
Oh, wow. That's some MacGyver stuff right there.
Yeah. So the camera doesn't pick it up, but you can reveal the hidden map.
Whoa. I feel like that's a start of some horror movie too. That's a great trick.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to account for just everything because there's so many things as a CG animator that we don't have to even think about that is critical to what you guys do. So I think that's why there's always a little bit of jealousy around 3D animators when we see stop motion animators. We're like, oh, they're really animators. We're kind of like faking it. We get a lot of mulligans and do-overs.
It's funny because I've tried some CG stuff these days where I open Blender and just moving something around virtually just breaks my brain. I don't get it.
Oh, really?
Like I can't grab it and move it. And I just don't understand like the virtual space of it.
Yeah, fair. And I guess when you were working on that show, does the graph editor, I mean, when we were talking about X sheets, do you kind of visualize things in like what we would have as a graph editor showing value over time of a certain thing? Do you how do you approach thinking, conceptualizing motion, and do you do it kind of graphically like that, or you're kind of use sound, or
I think
just reference?
I don't think graphically. I haven't really thought of graph editors in a while.
Yeah.
I think it's just visualizing, just seeing it in your head of how, something will bend and then something else will lead into that. And there's a ton of discovery in the process where you're animating, and you move the hips, you move the shoulders, then you work your way outward. And sometimes you just like turn the torso just the right way and then you flip it and it like surprises you how good it looks. And you're just like, yes. And you just like capture that frame and lock it in.
Wait, so when you say you flip it, you're evaluating your animation mirrored. Is that what you mean? Or?
Oh, no. Like toggling back and forth.
Oh, flip it between the
So I'd say no. I don't think probably rarely do feature animators use onion skinning. It's all toggling, like back, forward. So like back 2 frames, forward a frame, and then the live frame. So you hear a lot of that rhythm of like do, 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 over and over all day long. And then, as you're toggling that way, you'll move something and you toggle it and it surprises you with like how much life that little twist or that little movement has, and you just roll with it.
And so in that kind of posing process, you're kind of, are you checking things as you progress through the body, depending on what the action is? I guess you're starting from kind of the hips and what we would call the COG, and you're kind of just checking one limb at a time, kind of a thing. Okay.
Yeah. Normally it starts probably in the hips just because of the way the physics of it, right? So there's no point of moving an arm unless you've got the chest in the right place first. So oftentimes if you're doing a walk or moving around, you get the hips right, and then you'd kind of work your way outward.
I guess that makes it, that makes more sense and manageable, that you're not trying to just get it all in one go. Let me pose the whole thing and then check it, where now you're managing way too many things.
Yes. And then sometimes you do hit a pretty good flow where you've done so many frames that you can kind of just feel you can do a lot in one frame before checking it. And then once in a while you hit that magical frame where you do everything blind and then just toggle it and you're like, okay, it's good to go.
That's awesome. I think the equivalent for CG is when I see something that's wrong and I'm like, that's the X translation on this on this control, and I click it and I know the frame in the graph editor. I'm like, there it is. That's a nerdy version of our equivalent.
And so beyond the kind of organic acting process of stop motion is the mechanical side of it. So one of the most difficult things to do in stop motion is a character walking, 3/4 toward camera. Because then, you need the hips to travel the same physical distance every single frame. How do you keep track of that? If your hips go slightly too fast, they'll get past your feet and you've ruined your walk. If they're too slow, then you have to ramp it.
So using the winder to track incremental. Yeah. How do you do that?
So if you would do a walk on, sometimes supported by a winder, where you do the math and you physically draw out increments on the winder, so every frame. I've had shots where you can't use a winder and you have to go for it fully walking the puppet with tie downs. And you'll do crazy stuff where, so going back to before they had, monitors to look at animation, they were shooting everything blind on film, right? And that's kind of what added to the charm of the jitteriness of it, is they just couldn't review it to get it that smooth. But they were using surface gauges, so just bringing in a physical gauge with a point on it, and you would just mark a spot on their head. And then now when you move the puppet, you have a frame of reference where it used to be in physical space. Because once you move it, it's gone. You don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
So there's little tricks you can do where I've done on the tip of a surface gauge, I've put like the bristle of a paintbrush, like a single bristle. That's the distance it needs to travel every frame. Yeah. And you'll just jam it up against their back. And then as you move them forward, when you hit that increment, like it'll ping out the bristle.
Oh, that's so smart. Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, now just get the limbs, and now I can move the gauge out of the shot and then take the frame and then just do one bristle's worth every frame.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, this is so insightful. And just, I have even that much more appreciation for the kind of work that it takes to do that stuff at a high level, because that's so impressive, everything that you have to manage. And then to, we've talked all about the kind of technical and mechanics, and it's like, that conveys like a performance of that someone believes is alive on top of it, choosing that performance. And
on top of that, they have to feel alive and be a character.
Yeah. And they can't just do anything. Yeah. They gotta, that's wild. Is there anything that stands out as your favorite thing that you've worked on so far, either feature or your own commercial stuff or personal?
I think feature, I'm probably most proud of the Kubo scene at the end, where he's battling the big dragon monster. That really pushed me, and I had a lot of fun doing the action of it and combining those two scales of the puppet Kubo and the giant beast. That is probably my favorite feature work. And then personal, I'm pretty proud of, I don't know, it's all kind of different. I'm pretty proud of the work with the Lego bricks that I've done. And I think overall, I'm proud of the personal ad work, getting it to a place where it's like super enjoyable to watch, and finding that perfect balance of like getting people to instantly see that it's handmade. That's been a struggle, is like not using green screens and not using compositing, but like making it really pulling people in, that they can feel the stop motion nature of it.
And I mean, I guess it's another kind of question. We've talked all about rigs and winders and having puppets, but when you're using your own hands, do you ever just start shaking or something because you've had to hold your hand still for so long? How does that work, that you're basically animating yourself as well sometimes? Yeah. So animating a hand frame by frame, it's not as difficult as you'd think. Maybe, with the experience I have, it's not as difficult as I think. But I think if anyone was given the chance to set up a camera and animate their hand, I think they could find it's pretty straightforward. I do things to support. Like I'll have a cup under my elbow. Like I try to minimize the amount of strain that I'm going through. How are you managing animating yourself, but also animating something else at the same time? Are you keeping your arm in the same spot and then you have one hand to do everything else with, or how does that work?
No, that's just completely taking my hand out, animating the object, and then hand back in. And then somehow my sleeve will like just keep its shape, or it's pretty easy to get things back into place. And then I'll also pose my hand in a way where, like, if I'm curling up into a fist, I'll make sure I like get the most natural, like to start with, I'll get the most natural position of where the fingers would land, so I can like easily get back to that every frame.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And you kind of go into CG mode where your hand is in the shot and you're like, okay, like X rotation's good.
Yeah.
Like now this rotation, this translation, and you're kind of just ticking off each movement until it's back into place.
For people who want to get started, what would you recommend, with stop motion or animation in general? How would someone begin their journey? Would you recommend it?
I typically like default to an exercise where if it's stop motion, I tell people to just to get one object that they feel comfortable with, like a cup or like a little cardboard box or something, and animate it as many different characters or animals as possible. So, like slither it around like a snake, or have it scurry across like a mouse. And if you can handle like any kind of rigging or support, like jump it along. Because I think that's kind of the key. That's like the essence of it all, is like making anything feel like anything else. Like to me, that's what animation is. So yeah, I have a stop motion course, and one of the lessons of it is getting a bunched up ball of paper and animating it to feel like a frog jumping. So like, or that would be like like boo, boo, versus a rabbit where it's like, light on its feet kind of thing. So it's almost like you're doing the exact same frames, but timing them different. So I think, yeah, just taking an object and doing different movements is the key to it.
That's awesome. Is there any like recommendations or tricks in terms of animating Legos specifically that you found over doing stop motion with Legos?
I mean, I think professional rigging goes a long way for what I'm doing. I think that helps with the smoothness of it all. Yeah, I have like the winders and ball joints coming in and supporting everything, like whether it's floating or moving around. Yeah, I'll often do transformations where I'm going from build 1 to build 2. And I have no idea how I'm going to get there. And I just kind of like, just figure it out along the way.
Cool.
And then, yeah, just knowing like where people are looking. So if one object's turning into another, I'll like keep one red brick flowing through the whole thing, so people can like visually see something smoothly going through it, and then I'll just cheat everything else.
How does the creative usually go on commercial projects? Do you get free reign, or do they have an idea they come to you with, or do you get to pitch ideas? How does that typically work?
Yeah, it's kind of all over, but typically it'll be, here's our product, here's the messaging, and then it's up to me to like mash those together creatively and pitch an idea. And it's usually pretty lightly pitched. Like I'll just write something over an email. Once in a while, companies want to see storyboards of things and be more involved in the creative process. But yeah, typically, yeah, they just kind of trust me to do my thing. I think in my position, yeah, they're hiring me and coming to me based on what I've done previously. So it's in everyone's best interest to like just let me do what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. They hired you for a reason. So
exactly,
let that happen. Yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour, and I want to be sensitive to your time as well. I guess the last question would be kind of, you've answered it a little bit. You're kind of taking things day by day, but I guess the future part of your journey is yet to be written. You're just kind of still taking things day by day, or what's the future hold, do you think?
Unknown, but I do know, I think a big part of the success I've had over the last few years has been to really stick to ideas and concepts that are like one man job. I think a lot of the appeal of my work is like this one guy did this thing or was crazy enough to do this thing. So when I specifically decided not to hire people and not to build a company out of what I'm doing, and I think that's kind of the path I need to stick to stay on. Otherwise, the ideas get out of hand and too big and uncontrollable. So I do like working, contained by myself with, in this amount of space. So I think
that makes sense. It seems, the nature of your work is like literally hands-on. So yeah, you'd want to be able to continue that.
Yeah, that's kind of the guiding light of what I'm doing, is to not get tempted by building an empire of a warehouse of a studio, just to keep doing what works, I guess.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Where can people follow you online, and where's your course available?
So online, it's at Kevin B. Perry, Parry, pretty much everywhere. And then my stop motion course is through motiondesignschool.com. So you can, I think it's might be one of the only stop motion courses there. So it's pretty easy to find.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Kevin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's Animator's Journey podcast episode. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you get notified of all future podcast episodes. Check out the whole library of episodes we've done so far if you are just now finding us. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at animatorsjourney.com so I can help you along your own journey to becoming a 3D animator. Thanks for listening.